Hey there, viewers. Ever watch someone get caught red-handed right when they thought they had it all under control? That's exactly what just happened in Diddy's courtroom. His own lawyer was caught hiding evidence, and once it came out, all hell broke loose. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Envelope That Wasn't Logged. I've been working in this courthouse long enough to know the rhythm of it. Mondays are slow, Tuesdays tense. By Wednesday, everyone's either panicked or pretending not to be. That particular morning, it was raining. Not a drizzle either, but the kind of thick, gray downpour that makes you feel like the day's gonna punish you for something you haven't even done yet. The fluorescent lights flickered a little in my office, like they always do when the building's having a mood, and I remember thinking, here we go again. I'm Marisol, just Marisol to most people, 12 years working this floor as a federal court clerk. I'm not one of those people with a fancy title or a corner office, but my job matters. I keep track of motions, filings, evidence logs. Everything that flows in and out of this place touches my hands at some point. It's a quiet kind of power, and I like it that way. That morning, the docket was heavy. We had pre-trial prep for 3 federal cases, including the ongoing circus around Sean Combs. Everyone just calls him Diddy in the hallways, though we're not supposed to. The judge doesn't like informalities, and in this courtroom, respect is currency. The latest motion hearing for his bail denial had been scheduled for the afternoon, and from what I'd heard, it was already expected to be a no. Around 9:17 a.m., I saw it. A manila envelope sitting inside the evidence transfer tray near the service desk, marked Exhibit C. No barcode, no initials, no chain of custody receipt, just sitting there like it belonged. Now, that might not sound strange to someone who doesn't do this for a living, but to me, that envelope may as well have been a scream. I checked the system twice, then again under internal priority dockets. Nothing. No Exhibit C listed on the pre-trial schedule, no mention of any such submission pending. It wasn't just an oversight, it was invisible. I picked it up. It was heavier than most envelopes, thick, like it had a hard drive or stack of documents in it, sealed with a red sticker, not the standard blue. There was a single label, Judge Harrow, Chambers Delivery. The handwriting was, too neat, like it was trying too hard to look official. I brought it to Gerald, one of the senior bailiffs, grumpy guy, all mustache and muscle. Keeps to himself, but he's been around even longer than I have. This doesn't exist, I told him, holding it out like it might bite me. He gave it one look and said, "Then maybe it's not your job to worry about it." That wasn't like him. Normally he'd double-check something like this, maybe even run it by Harrow's secretary, but not today. He just turned away and went back to his damn crossword puzzle, like I'd asked him what time lunch was. I put it back on the desk. For the next few hours, I tried to forget about it. The courthouse moved like usual. Motions filed, files updated, attorneys snapping at interns in the hallway. But every time I passed that tray, the envelope was still there, quiet, waiting, untouched. Then, around 2:36 p.m., it was gone. At first, I thought maybe Gerald had finally moved it, but when I asked him, he just shrugged and said, "Didn't touch it." That's when the knot in my stomach turned to something colder. I pulled up the security terminal in the admin bay. It's not supposed to be for staff, but after 12 years here, I know which passwords still work, even though the IT department pretends they don't. Footage from hallway 3C showed exactly what I feared. A man, mid-40s, gray coat, confident walk, approached the service desk around 2:30. No ID badge, no visitor pass. He leaned casually over the desk, picked up the envelope and tucked it into a leather briefcase like he was collecting his dry cleaning. Then he walked right past security without so much as a glance. But here's the thing. I recognized him. Not by name, but by face. He was part of Combs' legal team. I'd seen him before in Courtroom B, leaning back with that smug lawyer's smirk that says, "I know more than you." And I know I'm gonna win. I froze. I kept rewinding, playing the footage again and again. There was no signature, no log. And when I tried to export the footage to a flash drive, the screen blinked. Then it went black. All it said was, Error 604. Data file not found. 30 minutes later, that footage was gone from the archive system entirely. Not corrupted, not restricted, just gone. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't know what I'd be saying, that someone with legal access had retrieved an unlogged envelope and that the footage of it vanished like a ghost. I'd sound insane. But in my gut, I knew something wasn't right. At 4:12 p.m., Judge Harrow denied Combs bail for the third time. His voice was firm, maybe even angrier than usual. Mr. Combs' defense team has failed to provide full documentation as requested during discovery, he said. Repeated non-compliance cannot be ignored. You could hear a pin drop. Combs didn't flinch. Neither did his lawyers. It was like they expected it. But I couldn't focus on the ruling. I kept thinking about that envelope. What was in it? Who sent it? Why wasn't it logged? That night I stayed late. I was the only one on the third floor. The cleaning crew doesn't come up until after 9, so it was just me, the hum of the vending machine down the hall, and the quiet rustle of old files settling into silence. I opened my desk drawer to grab a pen and noticed something strange. A slip of paper, not there that morning, folded in half, taped to the underside of the drawer lip, carefully placed. I peeled it off. The handwriting was small, rushed, like someone wrote it with shaking hands. It's he sees you now. I stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't race. I didn't scream. I just sat there, numb. Something had been slipped into my personal space without me knowing, and whoever did it knew I'd find it, knew I'd be the one to care about that envelope, knew I was watching. I stayed still, holding that note like it had heat. I thought about deleting everything I saw, pretending it didn't matter, but it does. I've seen things get swept away in this courthouse before. Confessions that vanished, names that changed spelling mid-trial, security tapes labeled lost signal even when they weren't. But this was different, because this time I was part of it. Chapter 2. The cases that vanished. I was 3 days into the internship when the cases started disappearing. Not literally, of course. No smoke and mirrors, no dramatic vanishing acts. But piece by piece, they were being pulled, sealed, marked, withdrawn, or quietly shuffled out of public view, like cards in a rigged deck. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But I'm not most people. I'm Manny Devers, 22, first legal internship, still trying to impress someone. Anyone. Enough to keep me on after the summer. I don't come from the kind of family that gets invited into this world. I clawed my way through night classes and 3 different jobs to land here, and I wasn't about to screw it up by asking the wrong questions. At least, that's what I told myself. The Southern District office was colder than I expected. Not temperature-wise, though the air conditioning was unforgiving, but cold in the way people treated each other. Faces locked in permanent neutral, eyes trained just above your head, like looking at you was a distraction from whatever real case they were thinking about. I was given a workspace near the back, 2 desks away from the break room, right next to the overflow storage where we kept printouts of filings and the occasional archived deposition transcript. No one trusted the servers to hold. That morning, I was assigned a simple enough task. Organize the recent case withdrawals tied to Sean Combs, 14 of them, all civil, all filed within the past year. Most, I assumed, were connected to the storm of legal drama surrounding him, accusations, settlements, whatever you want to call them. But it was clear even to me that something was wrong. The case folder labeled Withdrawn CMB Set Batch 9 in big bold text was already organized by date. But 3 of the 14 cases were labeled Withdrawn on internal logs before the official motion to withdraw was filed. That's not just unusual, it's a violation of basic protocol. You don't mark case as withdrawn unless it's been approved. Paperwork submitted, judges sign off complete. It's like declaring a winner before the race starts. And worse, the timestamps had all been scrubbed of user tags. No initials, no digital fingerprints, just blank entries with early date stamps. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Maybe the withdrawal notices had been drafted in advance and someone mistakenly marked them early. But it didn't sit right. These weren't typos. This was precise, deliberate timing, like someone was coordinating it from a level above mine. And then I noticed the redactions. It's normal for plaintiffs in sensitive cases to have their names partially redacted, but in the documents I was reviewing, some redactions made no sense. Entire witness statements replaced with black boxes, birth dates scrubbed from unrelated sections. In one case, even the judge's name was redacted in a pretrial summary, something I had never seen before, and which is never allowed unless the judge specifically orders it. But there was no such order listed in the docket. The more I looked, the more I saw that each of these withdrawn cases shared something eerie. Identical formatting anomalies. The header fonts were slightly off, like they'd been exported from a different template than the court system uses. Some of the footnotes had extra spacing. One case had a footer that read, "Exported via Proxyware Legal Tools, a third-party software we don't use." And all of them, every single one, had file metadata showing the same unusual sequence in the file name string. CMB mod sub 2N, followed by a long hexadecimal hash. When I tried opening one of the PDFs on my local machine, it threw up a warning, embedded content blocked. Remote signature check failed. By now, I was sweating through the back of my shirt. I wasn't supposed to be this deep into the files. I was just the intern. But I couldn't let it go. I traced access history for the first 3 files and confirmed my suspicion. They'd all been remotely opened and edited from a secure IP address tied to an external terminal. One that, according to the system log, hadn't been used since last year. The user profile was anonymized, but the registry flag said it had last been assigned to a member of Combs' former defense team. The same legal team that had withdrawn from multiple cases just a few weeks earlier. It was like staring at a chessboard halfway through a game, realizing someone had been moving both sets of pieces. I asked one of the junior clerks quietly if there was any known protocol for sudden redactions in sealed civil withdrawals. She looked at me like I'd asked whether we allow cats to represent plaintiffs, then gave a shrug and walked off. The message was clear. Don't ask. Don't look. But I couldn't stop looking. That afternoon, I sat down to compose an anonymous message to the judge's clerk. Nothing dramatic, just a red flag. A suggestion that something about the withdrawal timeline didn't match the official records. I wasn't naming names or sounding alarms, just a nudge in the right direction for someone with real clearance to look closer. I had just hit the preview button when the screen glitched. It wasn't a normal crash. The monitor didn't flicker or freeze, it pulsed. Once, then cut to black, before rebooting with a loud tick that echoed in the back room. My heart jumped. I thought maybe I'd tripped a security failsafe or hit a restricted file chain. When the system came back online, the window I'd had open was gone, so was the preview. My session log, which should have listed every action I'd taken, was blank for a 17-minute stretch. Not empty, blank, like someone had rewritten the memory of what happened. I checked the local backup archive, and that's when I saw the only thing left. One single line of metadata had survived, buried deep in the log history, not attached to any document. It read, "The corridor file, comms.ed.v3. I read it aloud to myself, slowly. The corridor file, combs.ed.v3. I didn't recognize the name. I tried searching the case index for anything matching corridor and came up empty. The term wasn't in any of the documents I'd reviewed. It wasn't a known case file, wasn't tied to any physical evidence I could find. It was like a ghost note, something not meant to be seen, buried and mislabeled so deep that it could float undetected forever. For a few minutes, I just sat there, my hands resting on the keyboard, cold with sweat. I knew what I was supposed to do: close the file, log off, walk away, pretend the screen had never glitched, that the names had never vanished, pretend that Combs' legal team hadn't ghost-edited civil cases like they were playing with invisible ink. But I couldn't. Something about that file name haunted me. Corridor, like a passage, or a path you're not supposed to walk down. In that .ed.v3 part, it wasn't just a version number, it felt like a code, like a branch off the main record, a clone of the real story, mutated and buried. I looked around the room. The office was empty. Outside, the hallway lights were dimmed for the evening. Everyone had gone home for the night, leaving only the quiet thrum of the air conditioning and the soft click of the motion sensor behind me as it blinked red. Somewhere out in the system, someone had scrubbed those names from the record, not to protect victims, but to hide something darker. And I was beginning to suspect it wasn't just legal manipulation. There was another layer, a network behind the lawsuits. One that didn't want certain things reaching the courtroom at all. I saved a screenshot of the metadata line and backed it up on a flash drive I kept hidden in my sock. Old habit. My brother taught me that when I was a kid. If you're ever the only one in the room who sees it, he said, make sure you can prove it wasn't a dream. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the basement lounge of my building, watching the cursor blink on my backup laptop as I typed out everything I'd seen, just in case. Just in case, tomorrow, it's not just the names that disappear, but me. Chapter 3. The Unspoken Deal. I've prosecuted drug lords, corporate schemers, arms traffickers, and men who thought their money could erase blood. I've seen witnesses vanish, evidence crumble, and cases turn inside out the moment someone with power feels a little cornered. But nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever bled like this one. Combs' case, or as we've come to call it internally, the file that never ends. No matter how many hours you put in, no matter how many statements you collect, it always feels like the real story is a shadow 2 steps ahead, slipping just out of reach. It started ordinary, at least as ordinary as a high-profile federal prosecution can start. Allegations stacked like bricks, trafficking, coercion, financial manipulation, you name it. But from the first day we opened discovery, it was like the floor shifted. Interviews disappeared off the calendar without cancellation notes. Witnesses who had previously agreed to speak started ghosting us. We'd go to confirm a meeting and suddenly the phone number no longer existed. The same people who once gave us names, times, details, gone. No calls returned, no addresses valid. One woman, we'll call her T, showed up for a second interview crying, shaking, and refused to step past the lobby. She just said, "They said it's bigger than you, bigger than him, don't dig." Then she walked away and never answered our calls again. And the evidence? It warped. Slowly. We'd upload a document one night and come back the next morning to find the formatting corrupted, the header removed, sometimes even timestamps scrubbed clean. One file, an internal log of Combs' charter jet landings, had 3 entries removed from the record in the span of 2 hours. When I questioned the data team, they insisted they hadn't touched it. The deletion, they claimed, came from an external override, keyed to something called a federal visibility lockdown. That's not a phrase we use. That's not even a real protocol. But there it was, clear as daylight in the system record. There's a 2-week gap in Sean Combs' international travel records from mid-2018 that no one can account for. No bookings, no custom stamps, no travel alerts. One moment he's in Miami, the next he's photographed in Marrakesh. 2 full weeks unaccounted for, no digital trail, no staff movements. I flagged it to our office director months ago, and she told me it was probably a private flight that wasn't recorded properly. But I've handled private flights. I've seen wealthy defendants fly into jurisdictions under false names. This wasn't that. This was something else. Something erased. I brought it up again last week in a sidebar with Judge Harrow. We were reviewing an unrelated discovery dispute. Combs' team had missed yet another deadline, this time refusing to produce their third-party contracts for the 2017-2019 fiscal years, and I took the opportunity to lean in. I told the judge there was a pattern forming. Buried communications, witness lists being modified and sealed without authorization. I even mentioned the redactions, names being removed without protective orders, entire dates vanishing from exhibit indexes. I said, flat out, that someone on Combs' side was coordinating directly with sealed witnesses, behind the court's back. Harrow didn't say much. He's good at that, holding your gaze, letting silence do the heavy lifting. After a moment, he adjusted his glasses and said, "Be careful how far you push that line of thinking. Sometimes the structure isn't made to hold every truth." Then he called for recess. I stood there in the echo of it, that sentence worming its way into my spine like a splinter. That same evening, I received the latest document dump from defense. Thousands of pages, all time-stamped for late review, like they wanted to bury something in volume. I had a paralegal sort them by metadata flags, one trick we use to trace last-minute edits. And that's when I found the hole. One specific phone record was supposed to be in the set. We'd subpoenaed it weeks ago. A call between Combs and an unnamed individual at 3:42 a.m. on the night one of the central victims claimed she was held at his estate. She'd mentioned the call in her deposition, said she heard him on the phone, pacing, saying something like, "Don't open the third tunnel, not yet." The call's record was gone. In its place was a substitution file. A black banner across the top read, "Sealed Correspondence, National Interest Authorization, Code A2, Clearance Required." That's not just restricted. That's national security. For a phone call? Between a music mogul and an unnamed party during a private gathering? I sat there for a long time staring at it, trying to understand. There are layers in this system, compartments built to shield sensitive data, diplomatic interactions, federal agents in the field. But I've never seen a civil investigation intersect with that firewall. Not once. And now it was in my case file. A missing call marked off limits because someone, somewhere decided the public couldn't handle it. The next morning, I was walking down the south hallway near records intake when a man I'd never seen before stepped into my path. Gray suit, no badge, no folder, just an unremarkable face and a look like he already knew what I'd been digging through. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for ID, just said, "It would be in the best interest of your case to stand down on discovery requests related to Tunnel 3 Alpha." I blinked. I asked him to repeat that, and he simply said, "Tunnel 3 Alpha, you don't want to go looking there, not if you want the rest of this case to hold." Then he turned and walked off toward the exit. I stood frozen in place, watching his outline dissolve in the security glass. Tunnel 3 Alpha. I had never heard the phrase before. Not in Combs' filings, not in any deposition, not in any federal contract we had access to. It wasn't a building designation, not an archive room, not a holding facility. I went back to my office and spent the next 3 hours searching our internal database, old case transcripts, federal property records. Nothing. But then I remembered something. Years ago, in 2006, during a racketeering case I helped with as a junior assistant, there had been a witness who referenced movement through the Alpha corridor. At the time, the court transcript cut off mid-sentence and resumed a page later. The notation read, "Redacted dependent classification." I'd thought it was a typo, some unrelated detail marked off by internal policy, but now I wasn't so sure. I accessed the sealed archive from that 2006 case. You're not supposed to get into sealed materials unless you have an active legal reason, but I'd worked that case. My login still worked. There it was, page 247 of the federal transcript. The witness, codename DJ, was recounting a delivery he'd made to a compound outside of town. He said, "I was told to bring it through tunnel 3A, underneath the records." And then the sentence ends. The next line begins mid-question from the prosecutor, like the whole exchange had been surgically removed. The redaction notice didn't list a reason, just a note, redacted per DOJ. / access clearance required. So now there were two cases, nearly 2 decades apart, both referencing something called Tunnel 3A, one involving a confidential witness, one involving Sean Combs, both scrubbed by the Department of Justice. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the blank wall in front of me. It was a drab gray slab with nothing on it but a pinned calendar that hadn't been updated since January. But suddenly it looked different, like something was waiting behind it, like the wall itself was listening. They tell you when you join the federal ranks that justice is blind, but they never tell you about the hands wrapped around her eyes, pressing tight. I stared at the name in the old transcript again, Tunnel 3A. Then I opened a new file and began drafting a motion, not for discovery, not for evidence, but for protection. For myself. Because whatever this tunnel is and whatever Combs did, or was told to do, in that missing space of time, it's not just about him anymore. It's about something that keeps redacting history mid-sentence. And now I was part of the sentence they hadn't finished erasing. Chapter 4. The fake confession. I didn't want to be involved. That's the truth of it. I had done my time, 37 months in MDC Brooklyn for a robbery I'll never admit to, and 6 months out with a parole officer who actually gave a damn. I was stacking boxes in a storage facility in Red Hook when I got the call. Not from a number I recognized, not even a city code I could place. Just a strange sequence, 7 digits long, that popped up on my cracked screen like it belonged to a world I didn't want to remember. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Sheila. No last name, just Sheila. Said she was working on behalf of a federal investigative adjunct, whatever that meant. She offered to buy me lunch, real lunch, not a vending machine sandwich, if I'd be willing to talk about my time in MDC, specifically about a period last year when a certain high-profile inmate was being housed in administrative segregation. That's what they call it when they want to keep someone away from the general population but not admit its protective custody. She didn't say the name at first, but I already knew who she meant. You don't forget when someone like Sean Combs gets dropped into your prison, no matter how quiet they try to keep it. People on the inside know things faster than the news ever will. Guards whisper. Inmates see the changes, the tighter patrols, the missing cameras, the meals served in silence. You feel the shift when power enters the building, even when it's locked behind steel bars. So I agreed to meet Sheila. She came in plain clothes, nothing fancy, and asked her questions slow. I told her what I knew. About how, for 3 weeks, the mood in MDC turned sour. Staff walked different, doors took longer to open, guys who were usually loud kept their mouths shut. I told her about the night I got pulled into the chapel without explanation and met a man I'd never seen before. Slick suit, barely blinked, said he was connected to Combs' extended legal assets. His words, not mine. He told me there was an opportunity, that the courts were expecting a recantation soon, and they just needed a voice to match. Said they'd already taken care of the necessary paperwork. All I'd have to do was read a script over a secured call line, pretend to be a female plaintiff, say I made everything up. They'd alter the audio, smooth it out with AI. Said no one would know it wasn't real. The money, 5 figures, wired to a cousin's account in Connecticut. I told him no. Not because I'm some kind of hero, I've lied before, stolen, fought men who didn't deserve it, but this wasn't a game. They wanted to erase someone's truth and replace it with my voice. That's a level of evil I don't play with. I said no, turned, and walked out. They never came after me for saying no. That's what was strange. I thought they might retaliate, cut my visitation, get me transferred to a harder tier, but nothing happened, at least not to me. 6 weeks later, the civil suit they were trying to kill, it got dropped. Plaintiff recanted, they said, something about new evidence. They didn't say what that evidence was. They never do. That's when I started saving things. Notes, fragments, letters I'd found discarded behind the chapel podium, typed and marked with headers that looked legal but not from anyone in the building. The kind of headers that get emailed, then printed, then burned. I took 2 of them. One dated April 12th, the other April 3rd. The weird thing was, the suit they were talking about didn't even hit the public court docket until April 20th. They'd written their defense plan before the accusation ever went public. One letter mentioned a corridor recording, said it was a fail-safe if the voice actor declines. That's what they called me, a voice actor, like I was a piece of casting, a footnote in their sick little production. I gave those letters to Sheila, along with 2 audio clips I'd managed to pull from the internal kiosk during my last week in. One of them was just static and whispers, nothing clear, but the other, it was the fake confession. My voice, or rather the version they'd built from it. I'd never said those words, but the cadence, the breath, the rhythm, it was mine. They'd taken my reading from the chapel trial run and used machine overlays to shift the tone, add a female register, smooth the transitions, but it was still me under it all, still my lie, layered into someone else's nightmare. Sheila looked at me like she didn't want to believe it. I think she knew this ran deeper than either of us could see. I never heard from her again. Not really. I tried calling the number she'd used, disconnected. Then I emailed the court office where she claimed to be affiliated. No reply. I checked the database a week later. My name had been removed from the internal MDC contact sheet, not labeled inactive, scrubbed, as if I'd never been housed there. I asked a buddy of mine, used to work custodial at MDC, to run a name search through their maintenance logs. He said my cell block ID was marked cleared due to repurpose, with all audio files wiped. He found one lingering entry still sitting in the backup archives. The file name? Testimony Rollback Voice Map _08 user alias Moser. That was the name they gave me for the recording, Moser, a ghost wrapped in digital skin. A few weeks later, I saw a clip from a preliminary hearing, one of Combs' lawyers playing a newly discovered recording, where the plaintiff says she was confused about her memory of the event. The judge nods, the gallery stirs. But I know the voice. Beneath the distortions, beneath the edits, it's mine. A piece of my breath twisted into betrayal. I filed a complaint with the Regional Oversight Office. No response. I tried to submit it through the standard whistleblower form, but the submission froze at 93% and never finished. I went back the next day and the entire form page had been replaced with a redirect to a government contractor portal. The only thing that still worked was a contact email I'd memorized from the day Sheila called. I sent everything, letters, files, audio, attached them as clean as I could, then waited. 3 days later, I got a response. Not from Sheila. From a digital forensics technician named Ellen Vargas, said she'd been asked to look into inconsistencies in trial materials for an unrelated matter, but that she'd stumbled across my audio file in a larger batch marked as DOJ Public Training Package version 2023_3. Said she could confirm without a doubt that the metadata from my confession had been cloned from a Department of Justice intern training file, a simulation used to teach entry-level auditors how to authenticate fake evidence. That was the origin point, the scaffolding they used to build the lie. They took a training exercise, fed it into a voice modulation program, layered it with my chapel reading, and turned it into a weapon. One the court accepted. one the defense submitted, one that helped erase a woman's testimony from public record. Aline's email ended with a single line: "You were the prototype. There are more." After that, I stopped speaking publicly. I changed numbers, quit the storage job, moved across town. Every time a car sits outside too long, I wonder. Every time my lights flicker, I hold my breath. Because I said no. But they still used me. And now I'm not sure if saying no mattered at all. Chapter 5. The Hidden Evidence. I was never meant to be in the room where anything important happened. That was made clear from the first day I joined the team. I wasn't one of the high-level defense strategists with decades of courtroom swagger, nor was I part of the inner circle who spoke in quiet rooms behind closed doors. I wasn't even a junior attorney, just an assistant. Paperwork runner, box shuffler, file alphabetizer, errand courier. On the official org chart, I wasn't even listed under staff. I was technically contracted legal support, which is just a nice way of saying they could cut me loose at any moment if I asked the wrong question. And still, somehow, I ended up holding the box that broke everything. It started with a simple task, handed off by someone I only knew as Case Lead 2. No names on this team, only designations, initials, clipped instructions. I was told to prepare 5 sealed boxes for delivery to a secured off-site archive facility just outside Yonkers. The location wasn't printed. It was handwritten on a torn piece of legal pad. Northridge Legal Holdings, Warehouse 6, Unit 3B. It didn't appear in our internal storage log. No chain of custody numbers, no digital checkout. Just a delivery order scrawled in blue ink and a prepaid rental van waiting at the curb. The boxes were already taped and labeled with generic asset tags. Supplementary materials, financials backup, discovery support. Innocuous stuff. At least that's how it was supposed to look. But when I went to load them, something felt off. The weight distribution was strange. One box rattled slightly, like there was loose hardware inside. Another was far heavier than it should have been for simple documents. I wasn't supposed to open them. That was the unspoken rule. But rules mean nothing when your gut starts screaming. I waited until after hours. The firm was empty. Everyone had cleared out for a prep session across town. I used a spare box cutter from the mailroom and slit the tape on the heaviest one. Inside, beneath a mess of decoy tax folders and a foam pad, sat a burner phone. Not a sleek, modern one, an old flip model, probably pre-2010, with a cracked hinge and visible wear along the edges. It had no SIM card, but when I powered it on, it booted to a strange splash screen. No carrier logo, just the word Archway in all caps, followed by a single question. Would you like to resume call log? I stared at that screen for a long time. The second box I opened was worse. Inside were miniature cameras, 5 of them. Not GoPros or basic nanny cams. These were surveillance grade, the kind with adhesive mounts and flexible necks, the kind you embed into the seams of furniture or air vents. All 5 were tagged with small stickers. Deploy 3A, active feed, week 2. I didn't know what 3A meant at the time, but I'd heard whispers. I'd seen it referenced in frantic emails that got deleted from the shared drive before I could open them. At the time, I figured it was some internal code, a filing system, maybe, a room designation. But now I knew better. Now I knew it meant something deeper, something tied to the core of this whole mess. The third box didn't rattle. It hummed, slightly, like something inside was vibrating against the cardboard. When I peeled back the lid, I found stacks of printed time cards, neatly bundled and secured with thick rubber bands. They were for someone named Colleen Ross, a name I recognized from the internal case briefings. She was a key witness, a former employee who'd filed testimony claiming she had seen Combs coerce and isolate guests at several of his private events. According to her deposition, she had left his employ in early 2022, citing unresolvable moral conflict. But the time cards in the box were dated March through August 2023. They were digitally printed and looked official. Punch-ins, punch-outs, location tags, but the format was subtly wrong. Our case system used 24-hour notation. These were in 12-hour format, and all of them had the same initials in the verified by field, CMBJ2, which on paper could be anything, but I knew what it meant. Combs, Junior Associate, 2. Someone on his team had backdated these logs. Someone had tried to create the illusion that Colleen was still on payroll well after she'd blown the whistle. I resealed the boxes and sat at my desk for 2 hours, staring at my hands. They were trembling. My mouth was dry. My chest felt tight, like someone had looped a cord around my ribs and pulled until the air couldn't move. I thought about calling someone, a reporter, an investigator, maybe even the prosecutor if I could find her contact. But I didn't, because right around 9:45 I got a message. Not a text. Not an email. A plain envelope slid under the door of the office suite. No name, no return address. Inside was a single bill, a $100 note, crisp, folded once, with a post-it stuck to it. For your silence, monthly. There was no signature, but the implication was clear. Don't speak. Don't ask. Keep moving the boxes, keep sealing the lids, keep pretending you don't see what's inside. The next morning, I was told the delivery was canceled. The boxes were rerouted to a more appropriate chain, whatever that meant. I wasn't assigned any more archive tasks for the rest of the week, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching, that someone knew I had opened them. So I made a copy. I connected the burner phone to my laptop using an old USB converter I kept in my bag. The moment I tried to drag a video file off the phone, the screen froze. My mouse stopped responding. Then the speakers let out a sharp burst of white noise, like a signal breaking through static. Then the screen went black. My laptop shut down. When it restarted, everything was gone. Not just the footage, everything. The operating system had been factory reset. My desktop files, my browser history, my backup scripts, all deleted. And then the phone rang. Not the burner phone, my personal cell, a number I didn't recognize, no area code, just the digits 777090091. I answered. The voice was flat, robotic, genderless. You opened the wrong box. Then silence. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one. I kept replaying the phrase in my mind. You opened the wrong box. Not a wrong box, the wrong box. Like they knew exactly which one. Like it was planted, a test, a trap. A week later, I was sitting in the back of the courtroom during pre-trial motions. Just another face in a sea of gray suits and hushed voices. The judge was reviewing evidence protocol for the upcoming hearings. The defense team was motioning to exclude several late-stage exhibits submitted by the prosecution. Then, something strange happened. One of the court officers wheeled in a sealed evidence container. Not part of the day's docket, no barcode, no exhibit number. The judge paused, asked who had submitted it. No one claimed it, but it had been delivered to the clerk's office with express priority. The label read, Defense Supplement, Internal. The judge, curious or maybe just impatient, ordered it opened. Inside were shredded documents, thousands of tiny paper fragments, white, yellow, pink, legal pads, invoices, handwritten notes, all torn, not cross-cut, as if someone had tried to destroy the evidence but not hide the fact that it had once existed. The room shifted. The clerk started sifting through the confetti. One of the fragments had a barcode on it. They scanned it. It linked back to our office. Our office? The defense's private archive room. The judge went cold. He looked at our lead attorney and said flatly, "You have 30 seconds to explain this." Our lead attorney, always so smug, so confident, didn't blink. He stood, adjusted his tie, and spoke in a voice I hadn't heard before. Not defensive, not evasive, resigned. "Your Honor," he said, "I hereby request to withdraw from this case immediately." The judge stared at him. On what grounds? Unresolvable ethical conflict. There was a silence, a deep one. You could hear the fabric shift in the gallery as people leaned forward, suddenly aware that the air in the room had changed. The judge granted the withdrawal. No one asked any further questions. Not in public. But I knew the truth. I had carried the boxes. I had seen what we were hiding. And now the court had seen it too. But the worst part? There were still 2 boxes I hadn't opened. And I was starting to think they were the ones that really mattered. Chapter 6. The Judge's Private Warning. I've typed more words than I've spoken. That's not exaggeration, it's the truth. Being a court stenographer for 19 years will do that to a person. You learn to disappear behind the soft clicking of the keys, to blend into the room like wallpaper, recording every cough, every breath, every truth and lie that dares show its face in a courtroom. I've transcribed breakdowns, revelations, and once, years ago, a dying man's final confession before he collapsed mid-testimony. But what happened that day in Judge Harrow's chambers was something else, something wrong. I still don't have the language for it, not fully, and language is supposed to be my specialty. It was supposed to be a closed-door emergency review, the kind that happens when something urgent surfaces, but no one wants it echoing through the courtroom microphones. I was called up just before noon. The judge's aide, pale, tense, unusually tight-lipped, motioned me toward the private hallway that leads to the judge's chamber. A few lawyers were already inside, including the newly reassigned prosecutor, a DOJ observer, and one man I didn't recognize, wearing a muted gray tie and a lapel pin I couldn't place. Normally, in these situations, I sit off to the side, unobtrusive, tucked behind my transcription screen and stenotype machine. I record everything, verbatim, with zero interpretation. Names, gestures, hesitations, all captured in rhythm. That's the role. You're not a participant. You're a witness the court hires to never speak. It began as expected. Harrow set the tone immediately, voice clipped and sharp, reciting a procedural overview of the recent evidence disclosures and misconduct accusations. The box of shredded documents had rattled the docket like a thunderclap, and there was quiet panic over the implications. Chain of custody breaches, ethics violations, an emergency withdrawal from the lead defense counsel that left the case in freefall. Everyone seemed to be trying to figure out how much of the damage could be repaired and how much needed to be buried. About 20 minutes in, just as one of the federal observers began reviewing the motion schedule, the judge held up a hand. Flat, quiet, still. The room stopped breathing. "Ms. Talbert," he said, turning to me, "please pause transcription now." I froze. That wasn't standard. Not without a recorded reason. I waited for him to clarify. Ask for off-the-record discussion or private sidebar. But he didn't. He just looked at me with a calm that felt more like command than request. 14 minutes, he said. "You'll resume after that." That number stuck in my brain, sharp and specific. 14, not 10, not 15. 14. I stepped back, hit pause, and watched as the room subtly shifted. Binders opened, files were passed hand to hand with a kind of weight I could feel across the table. The judge's voice dropped, but not enough to disappear. From where I sat, near the chamber's alcove bookshelf, I could still hear enough to understand. "If you think this is only about Combs," he said, tone almost bitter, "you've underestimated what's been hidden in those tunnels." There was a pause, the rustle of paper, and the DOJ man asked something I couldn't catch. Then Harrow again, colder this time. "This goes back further than his reach. You don't redact this kind of detail for celebrity scandal. Someone's using this as cover. and I won't be the judge who signs off blindly." Another voice, female, likely the prosecutor, responded with something about national security clearances. She sounded agitated, almost angry, like she was being pulled into a current too deep to resist. I caught fragments. Tunnel 3, Alpha, unfiled records, sealed directives bypassing jurisdiction. Then silence. Total, heavy silence that pressed against the walls like fog. When the 14 minutes ended, Harrow nodded at me. I resumed typing, pretending the room hadn't just crossed a threshold none of us were meant to see. After the meeting adjourned, everyone left quickly. No one lingered, no small talk. It was like they were afraid of the air itself. I stayed behind just long enough to power down my machine, organize my transcript drive, and do what I always do, make sure nothing personal was left behind. But something was. On the judge's desk, half buried beneath a case folder, was his private notepad. Not the legal kind, a personal one. The kind judges use for mental notes, ideas, reminders they don't want on the record. I shouldn't have looked. I knew better. But I did. The top page showed a rough hand-drawn diagram, a cross-section of the courthouse basement levels, or at least that's what it looked like. There were marked zones labeled Main Records, Storage Vault 2, and one section circled twice in red, 3A Below Records. Next to it, in scrawled capital letters, was a single line: "This goes beyond jurisdiction." I closed the notepad slowly, hands trembling. Every instinct told me to walk away, to forget what I'd heard, what I'd seen. But that phrase, "beyond jurisdiction," echoed through me like a warning bell. Judges don't speak like that. They deal in structure, in limits. For a judge to admit something's out of bounds, that's not just a red flag, that's a flare fired into the night. I returned to my desk and tried to focus, poured myself coffee, filed my notes, avoided questions. For the rest of the day, the courthouse felt wrong. Witnesses were pulled from the schedule last minute. Press access was reduced without explanation. The bailiff team on Courtroom 2 was doubled. One of the assistants from the defense team had been escorted out earlier that morning, and no one would say why. Then, just after 6, I received an email notification. It was from the court's internal delivery system. A new transcript file had been added to my output folder. Subject line: Chambers Session Restricted. Time-stamped for the exact time of the judge's off-record discussion. The transcript was 14 pages long, but I hadn't typed any of it. The format was identical to my shorthand expansions, down to the macro spacing, the punctuation habits, even the parenthetical phrasing I'd developed over years of habit. But I didn't type these pages. I wasn't recording during that time. I wasn't even at the keyboard. I opened the file, hands shaking. The transcript detailed a conversation between Judge Harrow, the prosecutor, and an unnamed representative, referencing multiple alleged meetings between Combs and individuals whose names were redacted with bracketed identifiers, redacted federal. The events described weren't legal consultations. They weren't meetings with attorneys or staff. They were something else. One section chilled me to the bone. Judge, and the event? It took place beneath the administrative tier, documented by internal feed, referred to as the offering. Judge. That's not a legal term. It wasn't a legal event. The transcript went on to describe a facility beneath MDC Brooklyn, a sublevel not listed on any public records, a place where gatherings had taken place, gatherings involving hand-selected participants, private security, and rituals that had no legal justification. The term corridor file appeared multiple times, so did the phrase Tunnel 3A. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, the clack of my own pulse louder than the memory of my keys. That night, 3 motions were sealed by Judge Harrow, all related to chain of custody irregularities, witness protections, and something labeled Exhibit L, admissibility under national review. The exhibit was never publicly named. Within 48 hours, 3 key witnesses were removed from the schedule. One of them, a woman who had spoken to the press just weeks earlier, issued a statement via attorney saying she was no longer mentally fit to participate. Another charge, one of the most serious, was quietly dismissed. No press release, no public filing, just a notation in the case record, dismissed lack of cooperation. By the end of the week, no one was talking. The courthouse halls felt vacant, even when they were full. Security officers started patrolling in pairs. One of the clerks from Judge Harrow's floor turned in her resignation with no notice. The cafeteria TV, usually tuned to news, was stuck on a black screen with the volume turned off. Then, the final nail. The next morning, I arrived to find my keycard disabled, my email access revoked, my name missing from the active personnel list. I hadn't submitted anything. I hadn't spoken to anyone, but I had been removed. The official reason listed in the system was suspension pending system breach review. I had never breached anything, but something had breached me. And somewhere beneath this city, beneath the courtroom where justice is supposed to live, there's a tunnel, a space below records, a place not meant for typing. And I know, Chapter 7, The Return of the Corridor File. I've worked with corrupted files most of my adult life. Court databases, lost evidence folders, disorganized federal backups. When systems fail or hard drives fry, they call contractors like me. We aren't flashy, no badges or clearances or corner offices. Just clearance-level laptops, decades-old terminals, and the kind of patience that turns noise into signal. The job isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about uncovering what was supposed to stay buried. And for the last 3 weeks, my contract had been entirely devoted to sanitizing a growing list of corrupted case materials under the umbrella of Combs versus Doe et al. The file cluster had grown massive. Thousands of linked documents, scanned affidavits, mislabeled transcripts, sealed motion packets that flickered in and out of visibility when called from the internal index. Normally, my job was to clean metadata, restore compromised headers, rebuild fractured file paths, and flag incomplete motion chains. It was tedious, methodical work that usually ended with a thumbs up from a supervisor and a paycheck 2 weeks later. But on a Wednesday morning, 4:37 a.m. if I'm being precise, I stumbled across something that didn't belong. Not just a glitch or data inconsistency. Something intentionally obscured, pushed so deep into the storage partition that only a brute force script could have reached it. The file structure was strange from the beginning. A backup archive labeled legacy_discovery 2023_raw stack had been marked as corrupted and left untouched in the system queue for almost a month. But when I began decrypting the directory paths, I noticed a string of embedded indexes that didn't match anything I'd seen in court records. No docket references, no exhibit numbers, no attorney annotations. Just a string of nested folders, each labeled with oblique terms like aux_line 17b, 0_depth_return, and finally, buried at the end of it all, corridor_file.v3. It wasn't in the official index. It had no access permissions logged. And yet, somehow it sat there, undetected, unmarked, waiting. I copied it to a secure sandbox partition and ran an isolation script, half expecting a broken PDF or malformed video hash. What opened instead was footage, grainy but stable, time-stamped for December 12, 2022, 5 months before the first civil suit against Sean Combs was ever filed. The file opened with a jittery flicker of overhead fluorescent lights and a stone floor. Then, a slow pan down a narrow concrete corridor, wide enough for 3 men side by side. No identifiable audio, just the sound of distant ventilation hum and a rhythmic metallic clink, like chain links brushing against each other. At the 10-second mark, he appeared. Sean Combs, dressed in black slacks and a charcoal overcoat. No sunglasses, no entourage, at least not at first. His face was partially shadowed but unmistakable. His gait, slower than I expected, was deliberate, like he knew the place by heart. He walked past the camera, followed closely by two men in matching dark suits. One of them held a silver briefcase covered in what looked like engraved patterns. Symbols, glyphs, maybe even letters, though none I recognized. The third man trailed behind, holding what seemed like a folded garment wrapped in cloth. They moved deeper into the tunnel. The feed cut to black briefly, likely a camera switch, and resumed in a broader chamber. The ceiling arched overhead, ribbed with old beams and exposed wires. Along the walls were what looked like reinforced cabinets or lockers, industrial in design, marked with painted codes: 6A, 7C, 12F. In the corner, a red emergency panel blinked once, then stayed off. At the 30-second mark, Combs stopped in front of what appeared to be a blank wall. One of the men stepped forward, knelt and pressed a palm against a small embedded plate. A faint green light glowed, followed by the soft sound of internal gears shifting. The wall slid open. Not entirely, but enough to reveal a short set of stairs descending into darkness. And just before stepping through, Combs paused. He looked directly into the camera. His face settled into something unreadable. Not a smile, not defiance, just stillness. Like he wanted to be seen, and knew he was. Then, as he stepped through the opening, he mouthed something. No audio, but I replayed it frame by frame, lips moving slowly. 5 syllables. None of this is real. I stared at the screen for almost a minute after the footage ended. The final frame flickered once before freezing. Combs halfway down the stairs, the briefcase still visible behind him, that same pattern shimmering under the fluorescent lights. I saved the file under an alias name and initiated a standard report escalation. That's protocol. Anything unexplained gets flagged to internal security through a one-way encrypted ticket system. I attached the footage, annotated the timestamp, and marked it for Level 2 review. 24 hours later, my access was gone. It didn't happen all at once. First, the dashboard login failed. Then the sandbox server I'd isolated the file in vanished from the host directory. My credentials were revoked. My internal messages marked pending review. I received no emails, no calls, just a text alert from my client account saying contract terminated, non-compliance review underway. The job was gone. Worse, when I booted up my personal backup rig, a completely offline unit I use for sensitive archive work, I found it wiped. Not just cleaned, wiped. Partitioned, flattened, factory defaulted, with the boot log showing a forced update from a source labeled Secure Ops Remote Patch. Only a handful of systems have the authority to do that, and none of them are private. That night I started receiving pings to my personal email, messages with no sender, no subject, just a single line repeated in different arrangements of spacing and case. They see what you saw? I knew better than to respond. By the end of the week, rumors began circulating. Not from the press, not a word of this had reached public media, but from inside the courthouse halls. Whispered conversations near the file room, quick glances exchanged in elevators. The name Corridor File began to appear in hushed tones among mid-level clerks, the ones still naive enough to believe in accountability. It wasn't just about Combs anymore. Word was, a sealed grand jury indictment was being prepared, not for him alone, but for individuals previously considered untouchable. Contractors, officers, internal handlers, names no one had dared say out loud during the early stages of the case. No one knew who leaked the file. I had buried it, but someone else had found it, or had another copy. Because one afternoon during a pre-trial hearing in Courtroom 4, as the prosecution reviewed a motion to reopen discovery on dismissed evidence, the AV monitor behind the bench flickered. It wasn't plugged in. It wasn't on the schedule. But for 6 seconds, long enough to silence the room, the screen displayed the final frame of the corridor file, palmed at the base of the stairs, looking at the camera, muttering those 5 words. None of this is real. No one moved. The screen went black, and no one, not even the judge, asked how it got there. Chapter 8. The trial begins, but the evidence vanishes. The trial of Sean Combs began on a morning soaked in unnatural silence. Outside the federal courthouse, the usual crowds were thinner than expected, their chatter muffled, uncertain. The barricades had been placed farther back than normal, the security presence doubled, but the press line was half-formed, like the media itself had been warned, explicitly or otherwise, not to make too much noise. The sky was overcast but static, a colorless sheet of cloud above lower Manhattan that felt less like weather and more like a mood. Inside Courtroom 4, the atmosphere was thinner still. Public seating had been reduced to 1/3 of capacity, with entire rows marked reserved but left empty. Only a handful of hand-picked media observers were allowed in, their badges stripped of outlet logos. No phones, no laptops. The walls themselves seemed to press inward, as if the building knew what it was about to contain and wanted to shrink away. The judge entered with more force than usual, his robe rushing the floor in a way that somehow echoed. Sean Combs sat motionless at the defense table. He wore a gray suit, not expensive-looking but immaculately fitted, and carried no papers, no pen. He didn't shift in his seat, didn't glance at the gallery, didn't greet his newly assigned defense team, who seemed to know better than to engage. His eyes stayed on the bench, unflickering, as if he'd already memorized the coming sequence of events. The prosecution began with intent. Their opening statement was clean, practiced, delivered with the careful force of someone trying not to tip their full hand too early. They walked the court through timelines, showed digital charts of known associates, introduced case numbers and cross-referenced complaints. They leaned heavily on the recanted testimony that had reopened one of the core allegations. Exhibit C, they called it, the audio file that had reportedly changed the trajectory of a civil case just months earlier. Now it had returned as evidence of tampering, and its presence was meant to anchor the day's momentum. But when they played the file, nothing happened. No sound. The courtroom speaker system, newly installed and tested that very morning, remained silent. The technician tried again. Still silence. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Please confirm exhibit integrity," he said, his voice flat but watchful. The technician paused, tapped the console, a frown creased his brow. "This file is not matching the hash log, Your Honor," he said finally. "The signature's been altered." A quiet murmur moved across the gallery, then was gone. The prosecution requested a brief recess to verify the chain of custody. It was granted, reluctantly. During the break, a team of analysts pulled up the digital signature history of the recantation audio. What they found was a fracture point. 23 milliseconds of audio data at the file's midpoint had been overridden not by standard editing software, but by a toolset typically used for government training simulations, the same kind mentioned in internal metadata leaks traced back to DOJ intern modules. The file was declared compromised, inadmissible. The prosecution scrambled, pivoted to Exhibit D, a visual log of internal communications between members of Combs' former legal team and third-party consultants suspected of coordinating witness redactions. But that file, too, had changed. The email headers were intact, the formatting consistent, but the body text was scrambled. Not gibberish, but repeated phrases, loops of words like a corrupted document stuttering. The judge called both counsel tables to the bench. "I'm beginning to suspect," he said carefully, "that we are operating inside a framework that has already been compromised. This is no longer a matter of contested narrative. This is a war over the foundation of evidence itself." The next exhibit, an anonymized testimony log known as Exhibit F, was also flagged. The audio conversion data showed two contradictory metadata dates. One claimed it had been generated in April 2023. The other listed April 2025, 2 weeks in the future. At that moment, something shifted in the courtroom. Not physically, not even audibly, but everyone felt it. A kind of slippage, like reality had failed to load properly. The judge turned back to the prosecution. You will produce a full integrity report on every digital submission by noon. Until then, this court is in recess. All exhibits C through H are sealed. Retroactively, a bailiff moved to collect the display equipment. A second bailiff locked the archive drawer beneath the bench. Behind them, Combs hadn't moved. Not once. Not when the evidence fell apart. Not when his former attorneys were name-dropped in violation reports. Not even when the judge ordered a procedural freeze. He just sat there, eyes open, still staring at the bench, as if waiting for something not yet arrived. The sealed filing order was issued within the hour. No appeal was allowed. Public access to all related case documents was suspended pending review by an external oversight panel, whose name was not disclosed. Witnesses scheduled to appear later that day were quietly withdrawn. One had reportedly checked into a medical facility. Another left the city without explanation. A third could not be located. As the afternoon wore on, the courtroom grew quieter. The chatter had dissolved into caution. Attorneys stopped whispering. Clerks avoided eye contact. Even the press pool shifted their focus from writing to watching, their pens still in their hands, untouched. Then, just before the scheduled adjournment time, 3:33 p.m., the lights flickered. One, then again. Then they went out. Not just dimmed, not just a power surge. Total darkness. The emergency exit lights failed to activate. The windows showed no external light. It was like someone had flipped a switch not on the building, but on the world itself. For 23 seconds, the courtroom sat in a vacuum. No sound, no light, just breathing. Then the lights came back. The monitors returned to life. The room was exactly as it had been, except now, on the judge's desk, there was a folder. Not part of the docket, not part of any sealed exhibit. A plain black folder, unmarked except for a single line on the front in gold embossed lettering. The final corridor, unopened. No one said a word. The judge looked at it, then looked up, then back at the folder. Who placed this? No answer. He looked to the clerk. Was this delivered? The clerk shook her head. The folder remained where it was, untouched. No one claimed it. No one dared to open it. And the trial, though still technically ongoing, never recovered. The record will show that proceedings were suspended pending internal integrity audits, that the court entered a temporary holding phase for revalidation of evidence, and that public access was revoked due to unresolved procedural contamination. But those who were in that room remember something else. They remember that look in Combs' eyes, that stillness, that calm, like he'd already known, like he'd already seen the corridor.